Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar today from ESS BIZTOOLS as part of our Tools to Create Opportunities series. And today we're going to be talking about the Personal Property Securities Register. I'm Peter Towers, the Managing Director of ESS BIZTOOLS. I hope you're having a good day. Title is no longer king. The Personal Property Securities Act, which was introduced nearly 10 years ago, has changed a lot of business assumptions. Unfortunately, a significant number of SMEs still do not appear to have a complete grasp of what this legislation is all about. First of all, it's called personal property, but it applies to a wide range of business property. Why it was called personal property by the government of the day, I do not know. And it applies to all types of assets except land and buildings attached to land. But it covers every other type of asset. The major business risk is if SME clients are unaware of the consequences of not registering assets on a government register, because they can lose them, bizarre as that may sound. So the real problems, the risk areas that accountants should be looking at is for your clients who have assets stored on someone else's premises. And those assets could be motor vehicles, they could be plant and equipment, they could be stock, it could be stock on consignment. So where are those assets? Where were they last night? And who are the customers? And is there a risk of preferential payment claims being lodged by liquidators, receivers, or trustees in bankruptcies? And this is a real risk area for tradie type businesses because they're receiving progress payments. And it could be alleged that they're exercising undue influence on their customers to make payments to them. And in the event of a insolvency practitioner being appointed, the allegation could be that your client received a preferential payment. And on that basis, the demand could then be made for that payment to be refunded. Your clients know about this. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. We all know that. Losses in Australia from this legislation amount to about $450 million. Now, there's around a $65 million payout relating to a top 100 international company who lost that on a mining site in Western Australia. They appealed to the full New South Wales Supreme Court and lost. So if the big end of town, a company that's in the top 100 group in the world, can get caught up with this legislation, what chance have your SME clients got? Most of the claims have been lost by SMEs who've lost assets through a range of matters. Sounds scary? It is. So let's give you an overview of what we're going to take you through today to give you an introduction to the ESS BIZTOOLS Personal Property Securities Register product package. We have a procedure control form. ESS BIZTOOLS has a procedure control form in every one of the 32 product packages which we have produced to assist accountants, bookkeepers, business advisors, and chief financial officers to be able to deliver a wide range of diversified business advisory services to your clients. We've got a key document which helps in the identification of the asset classes that we think are at risk. So we call that the identification of personal property schedule. And then we're going to look at some of the documentation we've produced to assist you with particular types of clients, tradies and contractors, livestock owners, farmers for their crops, thoroughbred horses. There was an infamous claim in New Zealand where the owner of a racehorse, a stallion, that was out on lease, lost their horse because it had not been registered on the New Zealand equivalent of the Personal Property Securities Register. Incidentally, our government of the day followed New Zealand on this legislation. So there's a lot of connections between the New Zealand legislation and Australia's. Liquidators' claims I briefly mentioned just before. And we're going to show you one of the papers we've produced, which will give you more ammunition to be able to share with your clients on the Personal Property Securities Register. I'm now going to go to our website and share with you the material. So what you can see now is the ESS BIZTOOLS website. On the left-hand column are details of the various product packages that are included within ESS BIZTOOLS. A subscriber to the ESS BIZTOOLS Advanced package receives all of this material. There's a lot of it. But what we're going to be looking at in this particular webinar is the Personal Property Securities Register. Obviously, I put the right passwords in and username, so I'm able to bring up the Personal Property Securities Register. There's some videos there that you can watch, and we're now going to download the content for you to look at. And I just need my material here in front of me. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is the procedure control form. I'm bringing that up on the screen now. So the Personal Property Securities Register due diligence system, procedure control form is on the screen. This is the guidance which we have to take you through various aspects of the work to be done. It's like a checklist. It gives you details to assist in the preparing of the proposal and the quotation to your client. We also have articles to assist clients after receiving their acceptance, just to ensure that your team are aware of what they've got to do when they're talking to a client. And there's some work checklists, and we're going to be looking at that first one, identification of personal property schedule, in a moment. And what we have here then is a list of some of the assets that fall under this Personal Property Securities Register regime: stock, livestock and crops, goods, artist works, plant and equipment, construction, plant and equipment leased, motor vehicles leased, boats and other types of watercraft, and also the same leased, aircraft leased, other physical personal property and other personal property. Debtors, yes, debtors fall into this. Unfair preference claim payments. Financing, licensing, trademarks and intellectual property. Loans, including loans to associated entities. Statutory fishing rights. I've never really worked out how that applies, but they're an asset, obviously. Assets held on trust by other people. And it can also apply in service entity arrangements with another entity, including in-house arrangements. And then we've got a general heading, other personal property. So there's a whole range of matters that can apply. One of the key protection strategies in this legislation is the retention of title agreement and the terms of trade agreement. It is essential if your clients are going to protect themselves in this area that they have both of those agreements signed by their customers and they are filed, and then they make the decision whether they're going to register that customer on the Personal Property Securities Register. So we might move on from there and go to the documentation that I want to show you first, which is the Personal Property Identification Schedule, which we call BAS 1645. So this is a summary that we select the various items that hopefully will guide you to be asking your clients questions. The role play I'd suggest is sitting down with a client and saying, where were your assets last night? And use it to identify to the client where they may have been exposed. So we start with stock, and we've broken stock down into its various components because it makes it easier for the client to understand where they might be vulnerable. So stock of goods, consignment, demonstration, etc. Now the first column is the owned premises, the owned property. If stock is stored on on their own property, there's no risk. But is it in leased premises? There is a potential risk. Is it on someone else's property? So a company hasn't got warehouse facilities and arranged for stock to be held in someone else's warehouse. If a liquidator is appointed to that warehouse owner last night, then your client's at risk of losing all of the stock that they've got stored in those premises. Think about it. There was a famous case in Queensland, a whole chain of stores, about 12 of them, with about $35 million worth of stock in them, and only about 29 million, I understand, was actually, let me rephrase that, only about 5 to 6 million was registered on the Personal Property Securities Register. 29 million was not registered. That was all lost to the liquidator. He was acting for one of the banks. Various premises on consignment. And we've broken it down just to make it clear. So if your client is supplying stock to businesses all over Australia, or indeed the world, but we're basically looking at Australia here, and it's on consignment, and something happens to that particular business, your client's probably lost that stock. And that problem could be magnified if they're dealing with some sort of larger business that's got 20 stores in Australia or even in one state, and your client's got a few $1,000s worth of stock in each one of those stores. It adds up. They could lose it. And it all gets back to the terms of trade and the retention of title agreements. What's the agreements that have been made available to the people who have got this stock? What have they signed? And has your client registered these transactions on the Personal Property Securities Register? We're then shown livestock and crops separately because there's been a couple of significant cases, and They're a little bit different. And again, we're breaking this stock definition down into its components so that it helps you to clearly identify with your clients. So we've broken it up. Livestock. Now, if it's on the farmer's own property, there's virtually no problem. But in any of these others, there is potential problems. Now, admittedly, the problem only emerges if an insolvency practitioner has been appointed to that entity that your client's dealing with. But there's a lot more of this happens than what you might think. It's accumulated $450 million in losses for businesses in Australia. Livestock on adjustment. Now, this is a big area when you think about it. Graziers, cattle and sheep are continually moving them around on adjustment. Are they thinking through the consequences of putting 500 head of their beautiful cattle on someone else's property? Thoroughbred horses. I referred in the introduction to a case in New Zealand where a stallion was standing at stud in a property and a liquidator was appointed to the owner of that stud. I think rather bizarrely, the horse had been withdrawn from the property 2 days before the liquidator was appointed. But the New Zealand Supreme Court allowed the liquidator to seize that horse and sell it for the benefit of their appointing bank. And crops, there's some different processes to treat crops. So has there been legal documentation prepared? In a farming business, it's quite normal for crops to be stored on someone else's property or on a lease property as they're accumulating parcels to sell. And then let's look at some of the other things that can come into this. Goods. Have goods been left in someone else's possession? Goods sold on your behalf by someone else? Mixed goods. Grain supplied to a grain silo mixed with other farmers' grain. Goods used for growing crops, seeds, fertilizers, pest control. There's special processes for them. Supplies and feed for livestock. The purpose of the day is to not go through each nitty-gritty in this whole process, but it's to give you an overview and to say to you, have you had a serious look at the risks that your clients are potentially incurring, especially if they are ignorant of this legislation? What about artist work? There was a famous case in Auckland, New Zealand, where a store was operating in the main street of Auckland, which I think is Queen Street, and a liquidator was appointed to the owners of that business. And painters and sculptors and carvers and all sorts of other people were there trying to get their products back out of that store, but they were met by security guards who refused them access. So if you've got clients who are making works of art and then leaving it with someone in their premises to sell for them, or even to exhibit for them, there is a commercial risk. And perhaps they should be having the documentation signed and lodging a registration on the Personal Property Securities Register. Plant and equipment. Let's look at some of this. Rented to customers, consigned to customers. There's been a number of cases involving scaffolding, tradesmen's tools and plant, cranes and other general plant and equipment. There was a case, another one in New Zealand, because New Zealand had this legislation about 5 or 6 years before us, and we copied it. But there was a case where a major building project was occurring in Auckland, and there was over $1 million worth of huts and toilets and other workers' facilities on that site, and they were seized by the liquidator of the developer. There's been a number of changes made by the government trying to get rid of some of the issues on this legislation relative to leased plant and equipment. And we've got full details in our material as to how that operates. And there's some key dates, the 20th of May 2017, before and after. Motor vehicles. When this legislation was brought out, there was a lot of problems to do with the lease period, which was subsequently changed by a new government, which is the current government. So this was not introduced by the current government. Boats fall into this also, and other types of watercraft, jet skis, anything like that. Anything with a registration number on it, basically, is the rule of thumb way to guide yourself. Aircraft. Who's got possession of the aircraft? That could get back to whether it was stored in a hangar, and a liquidator got appointed to the owner of that hangar. And then we got some notes on other physical personal property. Anything that we haven't thought of. Debtors is a big example, especially if it's alleged that you've received a priority payment or a preferential payment. Unfair preference payment claims. This can be a real problem for some businesses. Now, a comment, some liquidators have written articles to say that some liquidators make preferential payment claims without properly proving it. So if any of your clients get these claims, make sure that the liquidator puts up the evidence, and you can go to the court to have the court decide, because it has to be a preferential payment. It's not just all payments that were made in the previous 6 months. It's got to be that your client received the preference through those payments. So you need to be aware of that, because I understand from some articles that were written over a major case about 2 years ago that some liquidators are alleging that the claims made by some people are basically 100% of the payments that were made in that 6 months. And in most cases, it would seem to be very difficult to argue that 100% of payments made in a 6-month period were all preferential payments. Financing, hire purchase, licenses and trademarks. And this gets back to whether the license and trademark's been assigned to someone else. If so, has it been registered on the Personal Property Securities Register? Intellectual property. So is there documentation on the intellectual property? And is that been detailed to others? Loans, including loans to associated entities. Statutory fishing rights, I don't know much about. So that's an overview of the key areas. that I suggest you need to be thinking about and asking yourself which of your clients could be caught on this. Service entity arrangements can also have a bearing. Now, there's been some very interesting cases under this legislation whereby corporates have seemed to forget what's going on with their subsidiary companies. And they can get caught. There was a case where a Brisbane-based company had supplied plant and equipment to one of its subsidiaries in the Northern Territory. Whether the Brisbane company didn't know, but the Northern Territory company had entered into a substantial loan agreement with the bank, and they were obviously behind in their payments. The bank had appointed a liquidator. There was a few $1 million worth of plant and equipment on site in a development area of Northern Territory that was owned by the Brisbane company, all part of the one group. And that plant and equipment was seized by the liquidator because it was on the premises of the company and it had not been registered on the Personal Property Securities Register. You wouldn't have wanted to be the accountant for that group, would you? So this is risk mitigation, sitting down and making sure your client understands some of the commercial risks that they are running by not registering on this register. It's available for them 24/7 on the internet. There is some work processing to be done, but it could save a lot of money. So the next area I want to take you through now is just one of the forms. You can see here on these forms that I am going through, there's a whole range of them. But we have a form which will assist you to talk to your tradie clients who I think are potentially liable in some of these areas. Liable to be caught is what I meant by that. But primarily on preferential payment allegations. So they may have supplied goods to a customer. They may have supplied products to a customer. There was one tradie situation whereby a tradie organisation that makes kitchen suites had made 12 kitchen suites for 12 display homes in a display village and installed them. And the agreement was that they would be paid a monthly rental fee for those kitchens. And at the end of a 2-year period, the developer would buy the kitchens from them, presumably at the time that the developer was going to sell off the houses that they had in their display village. These kitchens were worth a fair bit of money, over $100,000 each. And a liquidator was appointed to the developer. The developer seized the kitchens because they had not been registered on the Personal Property Securities Register. And then to add salt to the wound, about 8 weeks later, the liquidator made a preferential payment claim on the partnership relating to the rental payments that had been made in the 6-month period prior to the liquidator's appointment. That was a real blow to that particular business. All of that could have been avoided if that transaction had been registered on the Personal Property Securities Register. So that's the type of form that we've got there for you to go through and do a checklist with your tradie clients to make sure that they've got the right documentation prepared by a commercial solicitor and that they're making realistic commercial decisions as to whether to register particular customers or not on the register. They don't have to register everyone. They can make decisions. They might look at the amount of money involved, and we have a form to assist in those deliberations, because it's not going to be easy for some businesses. I now want to show you the livestock form. This is a form for a grazier to complete with you. Does the business adjust livestock on someone else's property? Does the livestock producer sell livestock to processors and other? Does the business leave property on another person's premises? Does the business lease premises? If the answers to questions 1 and 2 was yes, does your business have a retention of title? So that's giving you some guidelines as to how you might handle that. You might notice that we mentioned the Ramalpa clause there. That's not implying that you can, or your client can still have Ramalpa clauses that were very popular at one stage. They're ineffective under this legislation. The reason I've referred to it is this is the successor to that clause. Let's look at the farmers with crops. Again, there's a series of questions that you could sit and ask that farmer. Does he supply goods or products to customers? Does the farm business deliver crops to storage facilities where products are mixed together? Does he sell crops to a livestock producer? He uses the crops as feed for livestock, because there's special provisions relative to that situation. And again, you can use that checklist to guide you as to whether you make a recommendation to your clients. Thoroughbred horses, this is in here separately, primarily because of the publicity that the New Zealand case got. Is your client selling thoroughbred horses? Or are they leasing thoroughbred horses, which is what the case was from New Zealand? Is it a situation where someone could claim a preferential payment, whether a liquidator could claim a preferential payment arrangement? And we made a particular note about the New Zealand case. New Zealand bloodstock lost its interest in its thoroughbred, Generous, simply because it did not register its security interest in the thoroughbred, which it leased to another party, which subsequently suffered difficulties. By not registering its interest, New Zealand bloodstock exposed itself to the financial problems of another party. And we got a bit more information about that. So the New Zealand High Court found that the owner, the person who paid for the horse, didn't own it relative to this legislation. I wouldn't want to be sitting here on a Monday morning and have a client come in and say to me, or any morning to be honest, and come in and say they just lost an asset under this legislation. I don't think you'd be feeling very well if you were the accountant, especially if you hadn't had this conversation with the client. Incidentally, if you do have the conversation and the client elects not to follow your advice, which presumably is to look at registering some of their transactions. Make sure you write a letter to your client confirming that you've given them the advice and that they've decided not to take your advice. Some clients might forget that you had already talked to them about this if they suddenly lose an asset worth $1 million. So we have an example in this form here of how the preferential payment arrangement works that you could reproduce and give to your clients. This legislation's been in place since 2012. It's been plagued by all sorts of problems. I think it was badly conceived in the first place. And then a subsequent government has made some attempts to change it. There was a review undertaken after about 2.5, 3 years when a new government was in power. And the report from the person that undertook the report basically said, I'm of a mind, to the minister, I'm of a mind to recommend that this legislation be repealed and you start all over again, but I know I can't do that. Very serious stuff. And there are about 380 recommendations in that report. And this is what your clients are putting up with. Now, most of them won't even think about any of this unless they have a problem or they hear of one of their friends or colleagues or competitors that's had a problem under this legislation. And here in this one, we've given you a summary of that cabinet maker that I referred to before. And we've got some notes about some of the action taken by liquidators to claw back what they claim as preferential payments. And this is what another liquidator said. There's been an increasing trend for liquidators to issue blanket letters of demand. Her advice was that businesses should seek advice and never pay up or offer part payment until they have received appropriate advice. Do they owe the money? The second liquidator added there seems to be an increasing trend for liquidators to send out blanket preference demands to any unsecured creditor who received a payment over a certain amount or a round dollar payment instead of payment on invoice during the 6 months prior to the commencement. If a creditor receives a payment in good faith, that is, they did not know or suspect the company was insolvent at the time of entering into the transaction, then the creditor should be able to successfully defend a preference action against the liquidator, not just pay up. Make the liquidator go through the process of proving their claim in a court. So that's the summary of those items on personal property securities register. I think this is a major risk area that accountants, business advisors, chief financial officers, bookkeepers giving advice to SME clients need to be aware of and need to be conscious of relative to your clients' affairs. Within ESS BIZTOOLS, we have a full product package which will assist you, and I've given you a view of parts of it today. Will give you an overview of how it all works. The personal property securities register paper that we've written is a very detailed summary of this legislation. And you can go on and look at that. So we'll just There's a list of what's involved in it, in the contents. So this is a paper that you could badge, as you can with all of the papers within ESS BIZTOOLS, and send to your client. Incidentally, there are about 580 papers included within ESS BIZTOOLS. On 67 different types of headings. This one's obviously risk management, personal property securities register. There are links to other papers in our system. Here's the comment about the major loss by the Forge Group Power, which is part of General Electric's. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. This is the comments about the General Electric International Inc., which was being pursued by Forge Group Power, that a receiver and manager had been appointed, where the company lost assets worth about $65 million. You wouldn't have wanted to be the accountant in that organisation, would you? And we've got a whole summary there then of the types of situations that can apply under this legislation. And we've got some flow charts out of the government's material. Now, since the inquiry that I referred to earlier, the government department responsible for this legislation has improved their act, but this can still be a huge problem for any business if it has not registered a particular customer or business that it's dealing with on this register, and an insolvency type event occurs by that customer or that business that your client is dealing with. And no one knows that, do they? So there's a whole lot of information in this paper. That will give you good guidance as to how everything works. So I'm now going to give you a quick overview of the tools to create opportunities. This is the big promotion that ESS BIZTOOLS has at present. This is a special promotion. We got 7 great products included. Your investment is only $795, including GST, for 12 months, 24/7 access. And this is a great way to get started on the delivery of a diversified services range of business advisory services for your clients. So each package has got 4 very key packages included. So we have their business advisory services training, where we've got 13 modules to help you get started, get your team geared up for what business advisory service is all about. You get the Business Plus newsletter, which we produce every month. We do it 13 times in a year. There's none in January, but you get 2 extra editions in May. One on the federal budget as it affects SMEs, and the second on an end-of-year tax planning. You get the ESS BIZTOOLS papers. You get 343 of them under 60 categories. And you get probably the most important document in ESS BIZTOOLS, and that's the SME needs analysis. This is a document which will give you the items to discuss with a client under a particular heading, whether it's debtors days outstanding, whether it's key performance indicators, whether it's raising capital, crowdsource funding, early stage innovation company, Section 708 capital raising, whatever it is, you've got it there. So it facilitates you sitting down, having a cup of coffee with your client, because many accountants tell us that that's one of their real problems. Where do they start talking to clients? Especially when in the past you may have only attended to annual accounts and tax returns, and you're now wanting to venture into a broader range of services. So that will help you. Then you can select 3 products out of this great list. We've got 5 business health checks for different types of businesses, and we will be adding to that next year. We got business planning, the tradies charge out rate calculator, very popular for the accountants that use it. One firm has over 110 of their tradie clients using this. Helps set the charge out rate on some sort of mathematical basis. Productivity, wages, holidays, working hours, markup on external purchases being made for clients, the overhead expenses, the targeted profit. What should everyone be charged at to get that matrix to result in the business, if it can perform to those requirements, will earn their targeted profit, which might have been $50,000 or $100,000, doesn't matter, you just put it in. Similar calculations for the professional service firms, accountants, lawyers, architects, engineers, physiotherapists, doctors, except there's no markup on external purchases. Retail wholesale, looking at the product mixes and the individual markups that go on, the real challenge that's going on in retail. Buying a business, client mentoring and coaching modules, material that you can send to your clients so they get a better appreciation of the types of services you can offer. Client seminars and webinars, crowdsource funding equity raising package. SME clients can raise up to $5 million as long as they're a company within 12 months. Debtors management system review. Australia's got the longest debtors days outstanding in the world. This package will help you to be able to show your clients how to reduce that. Early stage innovation company. I was talking to one of our subscribers this morning who thinks that's one of our best products because that is helping someone that's undertaking research and development and now realizes how much money it's going to take to really get their product established in the marketplace. So the early stage innovation company is a great way to raise capital if you've done research and development, because there's an incentive there that the government's giving to investors to invest in these young startup companies. It's great. Unfortunately, not enough accountants know about it. Government grants. Hopefully, after the last 2 years, you are aware of government grants. There's hundreds of them. But we have a system which you put in the profile of the client, takes about 3 minutes, and the system will report back to you the grants that that client may be eligible for. Produces a grant report. You can send it to the client. Will show the client that you're proactively thinking about them and helping them. Leadership modules, very important, especially for people who are going to be involved in this type of work. Personal property securities register. We've just looked at it. It's part of the package. It's one of the 3 that you can pick. You can pick out of 22, but you get 3 of them. Selling a business. The SME Debtors Systems Manual. You're able to take the templates and redraft whatever you want to, change some words, change some names, and you've got your client a customized Debtors Systems Manual. Succession planning goes on all day, every day. Businesses should be continually looking at succession, not just of the CEO or the board of directors, but what's happening within the organization. Using succession planning to move people up within the organization to develop greater skills and survival in difficult times. And we are in difficult times. Some businesses are going to boom in the next 12 months, but others will be struggling. This will help you analyze those clients. So that's the package that's available. So you get the 4 standard products, which will help you get started, help you communicate with the marketplace. You then pick another 3. Now, if you want some of the others, you can contact us and we'll negotiate a separate subscription arrangement for them. But you get 7 for $7.95. That will get you started. That will get you into the game. I interviewed Andrew Geddes, one of the original founders of the Financial Management Research Centre 40 years ago at the University of New England. And I asked him in the podcast, when should firms be making the move to get themselves geared up to be able to offer a new range of services as we look at 2022? I said, accountants are busy. Do they plan for it in 6 months' time? He just shook his head and said, no, they do it this afternoon. It is that urgent. This afternoon, it is that urgent. So think about it, please. If you need more information, you'd like to get the product brochure and the subscription form so you can subscribe, please send an email to peter@essbiztools.com.au and my team will send that information back to you very quickly. Future webinars. We've got webinars being presented each week. The next one's on Tuesday, the 16th of November, SME Debtors Systems Manual. I've just referred about that. And that's on at 1 p.m. AEST. And on Thursday, the 18th of November, we got the Grant Finder, looking at how ESS BIS Grants operates, which I referred to a little bit earlier. If you want to contact us, there's our contact details. You can send me an email, peter@essbiztools.com.au. You can ring me on 1-800-232-088 or visit our website, please, www.essbiztools.com.au. Thanks for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. If you have any questions on any matter that we've referred to, please don't hesitate to send that email. I look forward to talking to you again very soon. Have a great day. Goodbye. And I hope everything goes well for you. Goodbye.